Hey everyone, I'm Karma and welcome to part 2 of the history of Cloud9, where I'll continue the 2014 history about the famous and much loved North American CSGO team, Cloud9. Now if you've not seen part 1, I'll leave an annotation on the screen right about now that you can click to watch, and I'll have a card up on the top right hand of the video for mobile users to click, so that way you can go see that video and then continue from where I left off. Now, with that out of the way, we rewind all the way back to July and August 2014. Cloud9 had just picked up the former Complexity lineup consisting of Hiko, Semphis, Sean Gares, and Nothing after seeking to enter CSGO for a large time, mainly due to their popular League of Legends teams. With the rise of CSGO and with the upcoming major, this new team really wanted to make a big impact on the scene, and Cloud9 really wanted to basically get their organization to have footing within the CS scene. So with this new team came a new member to the Cloud9 squad, and that was Shroud. Now basically anyone who plays CSGO knows who Shroud is. He streams all the time, and he's like a really huge NA player. But at the time, back in July or August 2014, Shroud was just mainly a pug star or a rising NA talent who had played for Manajumas or Exertus, and both of those were fairly low to middle level NA teams. So at this point in time, he was mainly an unknown quantity, and he was really a strange pickup, seeing as he hadn't ever been on like a top team. Mainly they were always trading members between iBuyPower or, like the third best NA team. But this guy kind of came out of nowhere. And picking up a new member also was considerably risky at this point in time, because they had the new major coming up in a month, which was ESL One Cologne 2014. However, as we know now, Shroud has grown into one of the most popular and best players on the team. Now Cloud9 was incredibly successful at ESL One Cologne. They topped their group, which had the second best team in the world, Titan, the Danish Dignitas lineup that would later become TSM in 2015, and the Australians Vox Eminor, where they actually had some amazing results, especially within the group. They beat Titan 22-18 on Dust 2 in a sick overtime on the T side with 11 rounds in a row, mainly due to Hiko and Semphis dropping 34 and 35 frags respectively. Then they also had a massive comeback on the CT side of Mirage against Dignitas, where they run 6 rounds in a row, on a 14-10 kind of score line. They brought it all the way back. They had some really sick clutches from Hiko, but alas, they would meet their big-time European rivals NIP in the quarterfinal after making it out of the group, where they lost 2-1 in a very close series. Cloud9 started by destroying NIP on Nuke at 16-8, but they later lost Dust 2 and Cobble 16-14 respectively, with Freiburg actually having some really powerful impact moments within that game. So with these close results, and with Shroud posting a 1.01 rating for the whole event, many believe that Cloud9 could bounce back. I mean, they could revitalize themselves into a winning team and possibly become a top 5 team in the world. Especially with Hiko having some of the best gameplay in his entire career with a 1.13 rating for Cologne, things looked really great. They had a new great member, they had Hiko at his kind of peak in his performance, and with more than positive results for Cloud9, they could move forward with this new roster into CEVO Season 5 and possibly even win the tournament. So at CEVO Season 5, Cloud9 got off to a roaring start, and much of the momentum from Cologne seemed to still be within Cloud9. So they beat Shazam's Denial lineup 16-7 on Dust 2 and 16-3 on Inferno. It was basically a wrecking, and they would then go to meet their longtime rivals iBuyPower in the semi-finals. Now this time, however, they actually beat iBuyPower in the upper bracket semi-final to make it to the final in a fell swoop 2-0 series with wins on Train and Dust 2 at 16-7. And all looked well really for Cloud9 going into the final, mainly due to them having a 1-map advantage, and because it was a best of 6, they only had to basically win 2 maps, whereas iBuyPower would have to win something like 4. But again, iBuyPower would prove themselves much better than Cloud9. They would actually beat them after beating Netcode Guides in the low bracket 2-0. So iBuyPower would move into the series, and they would have a huge comeback and just basically destroy Cloud9 on the first two maps. So actually not destroy really, but basically Cloud9 lost 16-13 on Cache to iBuyPower, and they lost 16-9 to them on Dust 2 and 16-14 on Train. So at that point, it was 3-1. Basically, Cloud9 would have to win the next two maps or it was all over. And Cloud9 appeared to swing back with a very close 16-14 victory on Nuke, but it was all too much for iBuyPower, and they managed to beat them 19-17 on Cache after a stunning Eco 4K round by Shroud. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. You have to go see it. He's on top of the box, I think on A site, just outside main, and he gets like a 4K CZ round. It's crazy. But with that, Cloud9 were looking more and more to look like the dominant NA team. Even though they'd always topped ESCA or CEVO rankings, iBuyPower would win the LANs, and slowly that kind of vision kind of slipped away from them. But they still had the international results, so many still believed that they were the far superior team. It's also important to remember that this was really the early days for this new lineup with Shroud, and Shroud was really beginning to show that he can perform. But you could tell, like, Hiko was beginning to notice that there was some problems within the team. So this led them to a North American little LAN called GXL Universe 2014. It was a BYOC LAN, and basically their first match was against a team called Easy Skins, Easy Life. I can't quite remember who was on this team, but I think it was just basically a bunch of maybe tier 3 NA players, and they basically beat them 16-8. Then they went on to meet Mousebaz, which would later become CLG. So they beat them 16-9. And then they would then basically beat Shazam's Denial in a 2-0 series win. Now, mainly due to the fact that Denial had actually pushed iBuyPower to third place and put them in basically a consolidation final, you would see that in the end, Cloud9 would actually beat Denial because they didn't have to face really a super tough opponent like iBuyPower, who they'd always lost to. So they beat them basically 2-0. I don't actually know the scores. Sorry about that, but it doesn't matter. This then led them to the ESWC 2014 tournament in November in Paris. And with a newfound belief that this lineup could still achieve great things, with them boot camping in Sweden in the QPAD offices. So at this point in time, they just lost one LAN, then they beat Denial in one LAN, and, they kind of had really good major results. So at this point in time, yeah, there was some problems, but Hiko still had this huge belief that this team could possibly get somewhere, and a lot of the other players did too. Now, unfortunately, out of the 24 teams that attended, Cloud9 finished in 9th to 12th place behind their rivals iBuyPower, who finished 5th to 8th, and this happened mainly due to a round difference between themselves and Virtus.pro, which basically allowed Virtus.pro to advance ahead of them due to them winning 4 more rounds at Cloud9 in the group stage. So this was mainly very unlucky for Cloud9. If they didn't lose those 4 rounds, then they would have been in Virtus.pro's place, and they would have at least finished 5th to 8th with iBuyPower. So yeah, I mean, it's just really tough. And especially when you're in a group with LDLC, which later became Envious, and Virtus.pro, as well as the German Planet Key team, who were just, mainly average. You had 2 incredibly tough teams, 1 average team, and just a decent, well, actually not even decent, a pretty poor alien tech team, which I think was Brazilian. Anyway, so if it weren't really for that round difference, they could have seen themselves playing against Dignitas, which later became TSM, in the quarterfinals, and especially after what we saw at Cologne, they possibly could have done a pretty good 2-1 series win, possibly, or even a loss, and seen themselves finish almost as good as iBuyPower. Regardless, Cloud9 would return to their boot camp back in Sweden at the QPAD offices and get ready for the upcoming DreamHack Winter Major and the online tournament Case King of Kings. Now, I'll very quickly go over the Case King of Kings tournament because it's the first ever set of European online matches that we've got to ever see from an NA team in CSGO. So they managed to top the online group with NIP by losing to Scream's Epsilon 16-10, but they later basically swung back and beat Planet Key 2-0 with a 16-14 on Dust 2 and a 16-12 on Mirage, and then meet Epsilon again, but this time beat them also 2-0 with a 16-14 on Inferno and a 16-9 on Dust 2. So this led to them meeting Alu's Mouse Sports, which I think had Chris J, Carrigan, and Legia, maybe even Tabson. I can't quite remember, but at least 4 of those players were on the list, or on the roster, sorry. And they managed to also beat them 16-14 on Overpass and 16-10 on Cache to win the series 2-0. So they would then finally fall to Virtus Pro in the final, 16-12 on Overpass and 16-8 on Cache. So really the important thing to note here is that even though Cloud9 lost to Epsilon early on, they seemed to post very good online results. But do remember, this was around 2 weeks before the major, so really take it with a grain of salt, because they never faced a top team in this online tournament until the final, and it was also 2 weeks before the major, so some teams might have been saving strategies, especially teams like Planet Key, who were just kind of new to getting into a major. So now we're going to move on to the major, which was DreamHack Winner 2014. Now, there was so much going into this. There was accusations of players cheating. There was obviously accusations about iBuyPower throwing, and just a whole premise that basically NA wasn't going to win this. But for Cloud9, there was some incredibly high expectations, especially after Cloud9 had such wondrous results at Cologne, without really a boot camp. So now that they were boot camping, they were kind of expected to maybe make a top 4 finish, or at least make it to the round of 8 again. Just mainly because of the boot camp, and because iBuyPower had so many weird kind of results going on in their team, in that they would win LANs, but they would have some really shaky online results, that it was kind of expected that Cloud9 would have the better international results. So Cloud9 was grouped with Hellraisers and the rising and expected finalists Fnatic and the South African team Bravado Gaming. So Cloud9 met an untimely end with a 16-5 loss on Inferno to Hellraisers. They managed, however, to bounce back to a 16-1 win over Bravado on Cache, and then they basically got destroyed by Fnatic on Dust 2 16-5 as well. And basically just like that, Cloud9 dropped out of the tournament in 9th to 12th place with their rivals iBuyPower. And it was really at that point that Hiko started to question the future of this team. I mean, especially with such bad results at local LANs, especially with the continued losses to iBuyPower, the degrading major results in Europe. I mean, you'd gone from making the round of 8 to barely getting through, especially when you're not even playing teams that are that hard. I mean, Hellraisers are nowhere near what, Dignitas were last time, and admittedly, you should have won the match against Bravado, which they did. So it was just really they had to at least have a decent result against Fnatic to kind of maybe push them over the edge. But yeah, it was because of that they really didn't have that great results, and Hiko started to question that. But with a new ESEA LAN ahead, ESEA Season 17 Finals, Hiko had to play out the rest of the season on Cloud9. If he really wanted to try and give this team one more chance, this was the tournament to do it. So Cloud9's ESEA 17 Finals would unfortunately also be short-lived, with a 2-1 win over Chris J's Mouse Sports, with a 16-14 win on Cache and a 16-12 loss on Mirage. They would then bounce back and beat Mouse Sports 16-11 on Train. It wasn't until Cloud9 met Virtus Pro in the semi-finals where they lost the series 2-1 with a 16-7 win on Season and a 16-12 loss on Train, and then a 16-10 loss on Inferno. And with all that, almost all of Cloud9 began to slip. They weren't really hitting shots all that much, and when they faced their North American counterparts, Denial, in the losers bracket, they lost a very close 2-0 series. They lost 19-16 on Inferno, so it made it actually into overtime, but just Shazam and Denial just basically destroyed them. Need I remind you, this isn't the actual Denial Oh, actually, I think it was. I think it was the Denial lineup that had Anger in it, and possibly, I think, Nitro. I'm not quite sure. And then after the LAN, basically Hiko sought to have a change. He no longer wanted to be on a losing team. He really wanted to make some finals and at least win some LANs, especially in North America, and have really a decorated career. So Hiko thereby decided he no longer wanted to play with Cloud9 and sought to replace Steel on iBuyPower, especially after they had pretty close series against Fnatic at Face It LAN finals and the ESEA 17 finals, where unfortunately iBuyPower lost to Fnatic in the losers bracket. So with that, Cloud9 decided, well, Hiko, decided to leave Cloud9 and join iBuyPower. And iBuyPower basically left iBuyPower, their sponsor, and later became GX, and were probably going to be signed to Evil Geniuses, but unfortunately they got banned basically in January of 2015, sorry. So join me in part 3. I'm going to talk a little bit about Cloud9's interesting new AWPer, Shazam. He's really a rising NA talent. They needed an AWPer, and Sean didn't really want to AWP anymore. And the first half of 2015, where, they didn't really have quite the success that they wanted to, and how that built into the new 2015 lineup that we have now with, Skadoodle, Freakazoid, Nothing, and Shroud. So thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, shoot me a comment on the video. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you on part 3.